AI has the potential to transform just about every industry, including the legal system. Stephanie Condon with ZDNet is joining us now to talk about this. I know, Stephanie, you went to a conference where legal services, the industry there, talked about how they can modernize their services. And one of the things I know you mentioned, which sounds really futuristic, but robot judges. Tell us about the idea and how close we are.
Yeah, so I was at a conference hosted by the Legal Services Corporation here in Portland, Oregon. And one of the things that came up was robot judges. And it sounds, like you said, pretty futuristic. And but one of the experts there, Colin Rule, who's a pioneer in online dispute resolution, talked about how, we're already bringing in AI into our legal services and our judicial system. And thinking about it as a robot judge may not be the best way to think about it, because we're just building a new system based on AI. But Colin said that people always ask him, when are we going to have robot judges? Because what he builds, online dispute resolution tools, aren't really too far off. So when you think about where we are already and where we have where we're implementing AI, there are a lot of really simple but effective use cases in the court system. Like one person we heard from was a judge in the LA Superior Court system, and she told us about Gina the Avatar, a virtual assistant that helps count tens of thousands of people in LA process things like traffic tickets so they don't have to go to traffic court. And the LA Superior Court, which is the largest court in the world, apparently has several automated processes for issues like domestic violence cases and small claims court and child custody. These are serious, real problems, but there are already automated solutions. So people who may not be able to afford a lawyer and don't have the time to go to court can try and resolve them as best as they can through automated processes. And then the next step from there is where you get to online dispute resolution, which is where, an algorithm can not only guide you through the steps to, work through your case, but guide you through an arbitration process. And an algorithm can potentially help decide who wins the case. And when you're using AI in online dispute resolution, that may sound closer to what we would consider a robot judge. But as I learned at the conference, it's not a perfect analogy, because the way an algorithm would determine a fair outcome in a case is just different than the way a human would determine a fair outcome. A judge is going to use his expertise and basis of knowledge and, his own biases to determine the fair outcome after hearing two sides of an argument, and really think about those two cases in that context, where an algorithm would have an entire catalog of previously resolved disputes. And, it's a much more data-driven, math-based, formulaic way of determining what's fair. And, that can raise some questions about whether that's, the most fair way to determine an outcome in a controversial case.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Stephanie, you were talking about in some cases in very serious life-changing situations, and so any idea of how you can even build judicial algorithms that can be trusted?
This is already a major problem. For a few years, AI has been used in sentencing guidelines, and some of their decisions that have been based on AI have come under dispute. 2 years ago, the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled that it was okay to use a proprietary black boxed algorithm to help determine how long someone should be in jail. A man named Eric Loomis in Wisconsin was found guilty of a drive-by shooting, and the corrections department in the state gave him a pretty long sentence based in part on a high-risk label that he received from a risk assessment tool that was proprietary, so they didn't really show how the algorithm worked. So Eric Loomis took that sentence to court, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court said, well, the corrections department was transparent that they're using this algorithm. It wasn't the entirety of their the basis of their decision. So they said it was okay. And Eric Loomis appealed to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court refused to take up the case. So it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. How do you build fairness into the system? And when we heard Colin Rule, an expert in online dispute resolution, talk about it, first he talked about his experience in the private sector. He worked for eBay and PayPal, where he helped build a system. And he talked about the gradual manner of building algorithms that can be trusted. You start out by having an algorithm that just watches, it monitors disputes and learns from them slowly. And, as the algorithm gets better and better, you can start incorporating it, and it should be used more as a tool to work hand in glove with real people and not, the sole arbiter in a dispute. And we also heard from experts who talked about how you can build in systems to assess the quality of these algorithms. So even if, explainability is an issue that's already important in AI, but even if you can't explain how an algorithm works, you can at least assess its impact. And in the government, if you're building a new building, it has to go through an environmental impact report. You do a bunch of assessments and make sure that, determine who would benefit from it, who it would hurt, and the extent of the damage it could cause. So you can do an assessment like that of an algorithm, have, a third-party objective arbiter, people decide the impact that this kind of algorithm can have. And eventually you can build more trust into the system that way. And, also people made the good point at the conference that, in 10 years from now, we could rely more on algorithms in our legal system and look back at the way our legal system is run now and say, how could we have injected so much human bias and flaws into our system? Because if you look at the court system's track record now of bias, it's pretty bad. So we definitely need to build in trust, and part of the way you build in trust is by creating outcomes that everyone can agree are more fair.
Yeah, most definitely. And, when you think about, though, on the flip side, some of the things, though, that an algorithm, it just can't replace a human when it does come to some things. Was that discussed at all, that side of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I said we heard from the judge from the LA Superior Court, and she made the point, when she's on the bench and hearing a case, especially with self-represented litigants, people who can't afford lawyers to speak for them, they don't even know what to tell the judge in their case. And the judge really has to draw out answers. So if you're using an algorithm to, assess the arguments in a case, and the algorithm has to just use whatever information the defendant and, both sides of the case gives them. And if the information isn't the best information, that's just kind of like their tough luck. So what the judge was saying was that, a judge needs to be there to, it helps to be there in person. It's kind of a subjective assessment they can make, noticing things like whether a litigant is fidgeting a lot, maybe they're nervous, maybe, they haven't told the whole story. A judge can be there to draw out that information, to ask questions, and it could create a wholly different result. So there's really that human touch involved in uncovering information and finding all the facts that are needed to come to the most fair outcome.
Yeah, and a kind of a hybrid, as with a lot of things with technology, it seems may be the best approach. Stephanie, all right, finally, any next steps or things that we know about for the industry?
Yeah, well, so the legal system has a ton of data, and it's just not very well organized right now. So that's kind of the first step, is they just have to, structure this data, and before they get into using more AI, probably do some more basic analytics. So basic, you can't really build a predictive model until you have a better analysis of how cases are usually usually are resolved. So, one of the things I mentioned is that there are automated systems for custody cases, and you know, there's probably a ton of data in the court system about how custody cases are resolved, um, but we need to be able to just organize that and use it more effectively. So when someone comes in, I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, I don't know what our plan should be for custody, that, an algorithm can help them say, well, here's, the most effective models that we've seen in the past. So the data just needs to be organized. There needs to be some basic analytics. And I also heard from a lot of experts say that the industry maybe just needs to take a breath and decide, do we really need to use AI, or could we just use a basic decision tree, or, other tools that can incorporate more technology and automation to create better services, more efficient services, but don't necessarily come with all the risk involved.
Yeah, some big questions looming here, Stephanie, as they start to work through this. So, all right, well, we certainly appreciate your insight on this from the conference. If you want to learn more about Stephanie's story, make sure you check out ZDNet. Thanks for watching.